The afternoon at John F. Kennedy, Terminal 5, moved like a slow tide, warm air flowing in from the sliding doors and the smell of coffee drifting down the concourse. It was the Labor Day weekend, the kind that filled every aisle with rolling suitcases and polite apologies. Imani Rhodes stood at the counter of a small coffee stand near Gate 25, ordered a plain coffee, and left a couple of dollars in the clear tip jar. The barista said, "Have a safe flight, ma'am," in an easy New York way, and Imani thanked her. Steady voice, steady hands. She carried the cup back toward the gate, past families in matching sweatshirts, a group of college friends trading stories, and a retired couple looking at a paper map like it was a quiet hobby. The big windows threw sheets of light across the carpet, and the intercom clipped out routine messages, standby lists, seat changes, early pre-boards, harmless noise for a day already full. Imani traveled often enough to prefer silence over small talk. She liked being early, liked knowing she could sit down and breathe before a flight. Today, the rhythm felt familiar. A quick coffee, a glance at the departure board, a soft nod to the agent at the counter. Her boarding pass showed first class, seat 2A, a detail she registered without ceremony. She tucked the pass away and took a seat within sight of the lane ropes. The sign above the door to the jet bridge was dark. People formed little islands on the carpet, strollers and carry-ons and tote bags acting as borders, and everyone waited for the same gentle cue that would gather them up and send them forward. Near the stanchions, a young woman named Grace Liu scrolled on her phone and noticed Imani's calm presence. Grace had that alert look of someone who had spent time in customer service and knew how a room could turn with just a word. She also lived online enough to feel when something might be worth documenting later. She was not hunting for trouble. She was just awake to little things. The slight tightening in the voice, the way a glance lingered a second too long. She slipped her phone into her palm and left the camera app a swipe away. A small private habit in a busy public place. At the counter, a gate agent processed pre-board requests. Wheelchairs, a soldier in uniform, a mother traveling alone with a toddler, and a long list of needs. The agent's smile was practiced and kind. When Imani approached to confirm the boarding group, the agent scanned the pass and said, "You're all set, ma'am. Enjoy your flight." It was the kind of sentence that settled the edges of an afternoon. Imani thanked the agent again and stepped back, sipping her coffee in small measured sips so it would last until they called her roll. Kylie Hart, the lead flight attendant, came up from the jet bridge in a crisp uniform that seemed to fit the day's heat without absorbing it. She had the tidy look of someone who preferred checklists to surprises and who, in a crowded space, would rather be in charge than bumped along by chance. Kylie paused at the podium, conferred quietly with the agent, then let her eyes sweep the gate area as if counting to make sure the numbers matched the manifest. Her gaze slid past Imani, then returned. It was not rude. It was not warm either. It hovered in that thin space where courtesy can cool into caution. Imani felt it, the way a person feels a draft from a door that should be closed. Nothing in her face changed. She lifted the coffee cup and took a measured drink. A family laughed behind her at something small and tender, and the sound rose and fell like a good memory. A service dog in a neat vest settled at its owner's feet, big head resting on big paws, ignoring the world on purpose. Someone in the ball cap said into a phone, "If we land on time, I'll meet you for dinner." And the intercom responded with another neutral instruction. Nothing was wrong. And yet, in the way of ordinary places on ordinary days, small things aligned. Kylie walked a short distance to the coffee stand and returned with an iced tea, took a sip, then rested the cup on the podium. She spoke again with the agent, nodding toward the jet bridge, a pianist's light tap on the handheld device at her wrist. She was preparing the cabin, rehearsing the flow in her head, greet, stow, offer, close, review. She was also watching. Not suspicious, she would have said, only thorough. A good airline day leaves no question unanswered. The trouble is that not all questions are necessary, and some are not harmless. When pre-boarding began, Imani stayed seated. She knew her group would be called in this time. She watched the wheelchair passenger roll forward, followed by the service dog team and a young couple who moved like a single thought. Grace kept her phone in her lap and her eyes on the gate door. In her quiet way, she was interested in Imani, not for drama, but for the steadiness that seemed to travel with her. The agent called early families, then a handful of travelers needing extra time. The gate area thinned by a few, then filled again as late arrivals hurried in from the moving walkway, breathless but cheerful. The first class call did not come yet. Kylie disappeared into the jet bridge and returned with the same quick steps. A second iced tea bead of water sliding down the plastic. She glanced at Imani again, the look of a person connecting dots that might not exist. To the agent, she said something brief that did not carry, and the agent responded with a non-committal lift of eyebrows, used by professionals who keep 100 variables moving at once. Imani finished her coffee and tossed the cup, wiped a faint sugar line from her finger with a napkin, and stood to stretch her back. She had been sitting since early afternoon meetings on the other side of the river. Being early was a habit. It gave enough space for small human errors to be corrected without a rush. Grace watched Kylie's second glance and felt a soft, familiar prickle. She did not raise her phone. She did what she always did first, waited and listened. Nearby, a grandmother told a child a story about a trip out west when tickets were printed on heavy paper and everything smelled like cigarette smoke. The child laughed, and the grandmother laughed with her. The sound folded into the gate area and made it kinder. It also made the colder moments more visible when they came. The boarding door chimed once, a modest bell that called attention without asking for it, and the agent spoke into the microphone with a voice that could calm a room. Ladies and gentlemen, we will begin boarding shortly. It was a sentence everyone had heard 1,000 times, but it still made them sit a little straighter, gather their things, sort their pockets for the items that would be needed in the narrow space ahead. Imani checked her boarding pass once more and slid it back into the side pocket of her bag. She smoothed the shoulder of her jacket. Nothing about her posture demanded attention, but the way she carried her ease could be mistaken by the unwary for something else. Kylie stepped away from the podium and made a small arc through the waiting area, as if filling the room with her presence. She stopped near Imani and, with a courteous tone that borrowed authority from routine, said, "Ma'am, may I take a quick look at your boarding pass?" There was nothing unusual in the request if it was asked of everyone, and nothing harsh in the diction. The thin line lay under the words, not inside them. Imani met the request with the same courtesy. She handed over the pass. Kylie scanned it with her handheld. The reader emitted a neutral chirp. She did not hand it back immediately. She glanced from the name to the seat assignment, from the seat assignment to Imani, and then to the agent. She nodded once, the kind of nod that asked for a second confirmation even when the first one was clean. Imani said in a calm voice that felt like a shaded porch, "If there is anything you need to check, of course, I am happy to wait." She did not add why such checks can turn from a light touch to a heavy hand. She did not need to. Time and experience had taught her that the best answer to a small unnecessary question was a simple, necessary patience. She stood there with that patience on her shoulders, not as a burden and not as a show, simply as a way of moving through the world, without letting it bruise where it did not have to. Grace's thumb hovered over her screen. She told herself, as she always did, that recording people should begin with respect. If anything more happened, she would say aloud that she was filming and would not show the faces of anyone who did not wish it. For the moment, she watched without the lens. One could learn a lot about a room by pretending to be only part of the furniture. Kylie's face did not harden. It did not soften either. She returned the boarding pass to Imani and said, "Thank you, ma'am," then went back to the podium. She spoke quietly to the agent. The agent listened and tapped the keyboard in a rhythm that meant nothing to outsiders. The concourse hum came and went on a low tide. Imani said again, smoothed the crease of her slacks, and waited. She was not a person who counted seconds. She measured days in choices and tone. She lifted her bag just enough to ease the weight from the strap, and placed it by her feet. She thought of the plain dinner she would have at the other end, something simple near the airport, a diner with free coffee refills and pie under a glass dome. A child toddled away from a parent and then turned back, triumphant because distance had been conquered and the world still held. An announcement called for a party of 4 to return to the check-in desk. Another flight on the next gate began to board. The ritual identical and somehow unique. The long windows accepted the late light graciously. The entire airport felt like a place designed to coordinate strangers into something almost choreographed, lines and doorways and gentle voices steering. There is a way a question can echo even after it is answered. Even change into courtesy, it can crackle underneath. Imani felt the echo and let it pass through. She was grateful for the coffee settling in her stomach, for the barista's brief kindness, for the gate agent's tidy professionalism. She glanced at the overhead monitors and saw the destination letters like an old friend's name. Kylie jotted something on her handheld device, glancing at Imani once more. At the head of the corridor, the sign for boarding Group 1 lights up. The cabin was bright and cool, a pocket of still air after the warm concourse. From the jet bridge came the faint scent of jet fuel braided with the softer notes of brewed coffee and lemon cleaner. The aisle was clear, bins open like tidy shelves, and the soft soundtrack of greetings moved from the forward galley down toward the rear as the crew rehearsed the small courtesies that make a crowded space feel welcoming. The moment Imani stepped through the door, the routine felt familiar. A nod from the attendant in the forward galley, a glance to confirm the seat, then the gentle turn toward the left side of the cabin. She had carried this rhythm through hundreds of flights. It was a rhythm that, on most days, worked like a kind of mutual trust. She tucked her bag into the overhead above her row and claimed 2A with quiet economy, setting her jacket over her knees to keep the edge of the armrest from wrinkling the fabric. Sunlight from the big window fell across the aisle and up the opposite wall, a slow gold that made everything look briefly softer. For a moment, there was nothing to interpret but light and gravity and the low comfort of an airplane at rest. Kylie, in the forward galley, checked the cabin as if reading a line of music. Her uniform was crisp, tie knotted with a careful hand. She liked lists. She liked when the list matched the day. She liked when people did exactly what the list predicted. From the galley, she watched the flow, pre-boards at the front edge of the plane, families moving with the grace of practiced chaos, a young couple from the morning flight that had misconnected and were now relieved to have found their seats. And then, in the measure where all seemed to sink, one glance did not resolve the way she expected. She did not feel it as suspicion, at least not by her own accounting. She felt it as a question left hanging in the air, the same question that had pressed at the gate and had not yet been set down. Imani noticed that same question as a draft, a small change in pressure from the direction of the galley. She adjusted the angle of the window shade. Her hands moved carefully. She had practiced being careful not as a performance, but as a way to leave less room for misreading. The seat itself was a small harbor. The armrest held the soft weight of her forearm. The pocket held the safety card everyone reads without reading. On the tray table was a faint circle from another traveler's cup, wiped clean but still there, a ghost of ordinary life. Grace came on board with a light backpack and the look of someone who belongs anywhere people are paying attention to each other. She took a seat a couple of rows behind Imani on the aisle and slid her bag under the seat with the practiced motion of a frequent traveler. Her eyes were bright with curiosity, not nosiness, a difference anyone who has worked with the public can spot in half a heartbeat. She glanced toward the forward galley, toward Imani, then toward the small phone tucked in her palm. She kept the camera off and the mind on. Awareness first, she told herself. Recording later if kindness could be kept intact. The door chime sounded from the jet bridge. There were still a few minutes left before the push began. More than enough time to finish the rituals of stowing, greeting, and settling. Kylie moved down the aisle with her held device, checking bins, checking belts, checking that small square of reality where a boarding pass, a face, and the seat number make a perfect triangle. She stopped at 2A, and the polite smile most travelers know so well was in place but strained a little at the edges, the way a smile does when paired with a thought the speaker is trying to treat as harmless. "Ma'am," she said in a tone that was smooth and professionally warm, "may I see your boarding pass and identification again?" Imani opened the small clasp on her bag and took out the pass and her identification, both handled with a steadiness that makes even official documents feel less like performance and more like ordinary life. She offered them, and Kylie scanned the pass with the device. The scanner chirped, neutral and crisp, the electronic equivalent of a nod. Kylie checked the name against the identification and then against the manifest, eyes moving in a pattern learned by heart. "Thank you," Imani said, voice still in that shaded porch register. If you need to check anything in the internal system, I am happy to wait. Kylie's smile held. There may be a system hiccup, ma'am, she said, keeping the words even. It will just take a moment. Grace watched without raising her phone. She let the scene breathe. The passenger in the window seat ahead of Imani adjusted the ball cap and angled his vent. Across the aisle, a young mother buckled a child into a safety harness and whispered a promise about cookies at the other end, not as a bribe but as a picture to make time less heavy. Farther back, someone laughed softly at the text, then put the phone away as if to prove they could. Kylie handed back the identification but kept the boarding pass a fraction longer than the moment needed to pass it. Her eyes moved from the seat map to Imani and back again. The polite language was still on her tongue. The question underneath it had not shifted. If it helps, Imani offered, you can cross-check the reservation code. The gate confirmed it a short while ago. Kylie nodded, a gesture that could have meant yes or simply I heard you. She stepped back into the aisle to let another passenger by and then leaned toward the forward galley to speak with a colleague, voice light but lined with purpose. The colleague glanced toward 2A and then back at the handheld screen, fingers moving in a disciplined rhythm. They were professionals doing what they were trained to do. The trouble, as always, was not the training. It was the door the wrong question can open. Grace felt the temperature of the moment rise a single degree. It was not hot, not yet. It was the slow turn of attention that can roll through a room on barely a word. She took a breath and let it out quietly, like someone learning a song by ear. She thought, as she often did, about how dignity is a shared project in public places, and how it frays when a single thread gets pulled. Kylie returned. She did not stand in the aisle as if to block it. She took the space the job gives her. No more, no less. Ma'am, she said, careful again. There may be a mismatch on the seat assignment for this ticket. It could be a simple system issue. Would you be willing to sit in the main cabin for a few minutes while we verify? It will help us keep boarding on time. There it was, at last. Not just the question, but the request that follows the wrong question. Imani's hands were still quiet in her lap. She met the eyes offered to her and kept her tone level. My seat is 2A, she said. I will remain here while you verify in the internal system. A few rows back, Grace saw the polite shape of the exchange and also the one beneath it. She could feel the nudge toward inconvenience that is too often sent down the path of least protest. Her phone stayed in her hand, camera still dark. She was not hiding. She was choosing the time when bearing witness serves people rather than turning them into a spectacle. Kylie's face showed the briefest play of emotions. An impulse to insist, a second impulse to retreat, and a third that looked like calculation. She reached for the interphone near the galley and spoke softly. Her hand cupped around the mouthpiece. Professional privacy in the public space. Her colleague answered with the same low tone. A back and forth made of initials and seat numbers and the measured caution of people who know how quickly small things can become large. Imani turned slightly toward the window. The tarmac was a near still picture of trucks and cones and orange-vested figures finishing tasks in a choreography that has to be right every time. The light across the wing had shifted toward late afternoon, a flatter gold that promised a cooler evening at the other end of the continent. She thought of a simple dinner, coffee poured without being asked, the way a server might say dear or hung in a voice that turns a late hour into a friendly one. She thought of the many times a day she had placed patience between herself and a moment that did not deserve it. She thought, and then she let the thoughts drift without hardening. A family of 4 paused in the aisle, the father murmuring an apology when a bag brushed a shoulder. The apology was accepted immediately, pleasantly, as if to remind the room that most human friction is solved best by small, sincere words. The child wore a felt badge that said future pilot and held the title with solemn pride. The mother smiled at Imani in that quick, conspiratorial way that women do when acknowledging a shared effort to stay gracious in spaces that do not always return the favor. Kylie returned to the seat with a new note in her voice. It was still courteous. It carried a firmer line. Ma'am, we are still looking into it, she said. I understand this is inconvenient. We want to make sure everything is correct. Why didn't this serve? I appreciate accuracy, Imani said. Please use the internal system. I will remain at my assigned seat until the verification is complete." Her tone did not rise. It did not need to. The sentence landed without weight, but with shape. An invitation to do the job well. The words were the same words any passenger might use. The context inside them was a history that did not need to be recited aloud in order to be present in the room. Grace could feel the room learning her. She thought of the grandmother at the gate who had said once upon a time in airports, and how a story can be both past and present at the same time. She thought of the ways people tell each other who belongs and who does not, with nothing more than the repetition of tiny gestures. She slid her phone into the seat pocket in front of her with the camera up, not recording, only ready, her mind firm on the intention she had set long before. To be useful, not loud. At the forward galley, a tone sounded from the handheld device that signaled another small piece of data had arrived. Kylie read it, blinked, and then looked toward the flight deck door where the captain would appear if called. She did not call yet. Instead, she turned back to 2A with a version of her professional smile that had lost some gloss. "Thank you for your patience," she said. And the phrase hovered in the air as a courtesy and as an admission that patience had become the cost of the moment. Imani nodded once. Patience is not a quality she enjoys being praised for. It is a skill she has had to use more often than anyone should be asked to. Her eyes were steady, not hard. The calm around her did not dilute the seriousness of being asked to wait for proof of things already proven. It simply set the terms. Dignity would not be forfeited in the very act of asserting it. Another passenger in the row behind asked softly if the flight would leave on schedule. Kylie assured her it would, her voice warm, rhythm smooth, the performance of normalcy briefly restored where it was easiest to restore it. She began to move down the aisle to check belts and bags again, perhaps to borrow from the comfort of tasks that always answer back with a yes, this is done, and a small electronic chime. In the seat behind Grace, a man cleared his throat and leaned toward the aisle as if to join the conversation, then thought better of it. Choices multiplied in rooms like this. People decided whether to step in, to look away, to pretend they had not seen, to offer a smile that could be understood as solidarity or as a nervous tic. The silence of the many was not a failure. Often, it was a vote for the hope that the few would do their work with care. Grace let her fingers rest on the phone and pictured the words she would use if she had to speak on camera. That she was recording, that she would avoid faces, that she would blur voices if asked, that she was there to document procedure, not to escalate. She thought of the way language itself can turn a scene. She thought of how to keep her own voice low and useful. Kylie looked again at her device, then at Imani, weighing the minutes left before the final checks began. Boarding was nearly complete. The small tremor that runs through a cabin when the door is about to close had not yet arrived, but the steps toward that moment were on schedule. Procedurally, there were choices to make. Culturally, there were choices to make as well. The first kind had rules. The second had stakes. "Ma'am," she said a final time in this first exchange, "we are going to verify with the internal system. Thank you for staying seated." Imani gave a small nod that meant go on and do what is right. Kylie pressed the intercom to call a colleague, her eyes still fixed on Imani. The overhead lights shifted to door close mode. The aircraft remained paused at the gate, a patient machine with its own breathing, air moving through the vents in a steady hush, while the door to the jet bridge stayed open to the warm corridor. Overhead, the chime for a routine cabin announcement faded, and the recorded voice reminded everyone that stowing bags early kept aisles clear. Group 1 and Group 2 had already settled. Belts clicked, bins closed, a small chorus of zippers and Velcro finished their part and then went still. The forward galley glowed with the familiar reflected light of stainless steel. A page from the safety card lifted and fell in a lazy draft. The moment was ordinary in every way except in the way the room had begun to listen to itself. Kylie checked her handheld device and felt that same unsettled pause she had carried up the jet bridge from the gate. She had told herself all day that thoroughness was a kindness to everyone else who needed the plane to leave on time. She had told herself that asking twice was better than assuming once. Yet thoroughness can tilt when it leans too hard in one direction, and even the best intentions can pick up weight they were not meant to carry. She glanced toward the flight deck and knew that if she was going to elevate this beyond the cabin, she had to do it cleanly and quickly. Captain Nolan Avery stepped from the cockpit with a clipboard tucked under one arm, a pen clipped at the top like a slender metronome. He had the steady look of a man who had made peace with checklists as a philosophy. His eyes took in the aisle, the forward rows, and then the set of Kylie's shoulders. He understood the language of posture. 1,000 flights had taught him when a colleague needed a decision more than a pep talk. "Captain," Kylie said in a tone that held to calm, "we have a question on a seat assignment in the forward cabin. It may be a simple system issue. I want to verify before the door closes." And, Nolan's face remained even. "We can handle it," he said. "We also need to keep the timeline intact. How long do you need?" "A moment," Kylie answered. She looked to 2A. "Ma'am, I appreciate your patience. We are verifying now." Imani sat where she had chosen to remain. Her back rested comfortably against the seat. Her hands were folded easily in her lap. "Captain," she said when Nolan stepped closer, "I am valid for this seat. Please verify in the internal system. I will cooperate with any lawful request." Nolan nodded, neither taking nor giving offense. He had learned to measure his words so they did not add friction where none was needed. He turned to Kylie. "Use the internal channel," he said. "Let me know what you receive." From 2 rows back, Grace watched the exchange with the quiet attention of someone who has seen a story try to write itself one way and has learned how to steady her breath while guiding it another. She took out her phone and, in a clear voice meant for public places, said, "I am going to record. I will avoid faces and mute anyone who wishes it. I am documenting procedure." The sentence landed in the cabin with the soft authority of courtesy done correctly. A woman across the aisle nodded once in relief. A man 1 row back looked grateful without having to say so. Grace began the live stream. She framed the shot to show the forward galley, the captain in profile, Kylie holding the handheld device, and the row numbers without reading any names. "We are at John F. Kennedy, Terminal 5, she said, choosing each word carefully so text-to-speech would not mangle it. "A seat verification is underway in the forward cabin. I am here as a witness. If anyone prefers not to be recorded, say so and I will tilt away." Comments began to arrive like soft taps on a window, people thanking her for being calm, people asking whether they should call the airline's customer service line to log their concern, people reminding each other to be respectful. Kylie's device pinged with a new fragment from the reservation system. She scanned. The lines of data did not line up as neatly as she wanted. She had not yet called security, but the idea that a few firm steps would make the picture snap into place had been gaining ground in her mind the way water gains ground on a flat surface, with almost no sound at all. She pressed the interphone, one hand raised slightly to carve a private pocket in a public room, and spoke in the even shorthand that cabin crews use when the stakes are both small and real. Imani kept her gaze level. She had seen many versions of this moment across years of travel. Most passed like clouds that never grow into thunderstorms. Some gathered. The difference lay not only in procedure but in posture. How people held their authority, how they used it. She rubbed a thumb against the edge of the boarding pass. Not from nerves, but to center her body in a space that wanted to unsettle it. Out the window, a fuel truck hummed past. A worker in a bright vest lifted 2 fingers to a colleague in a greeting that had the warmth of old habit. The cabin listened as Nolan weighed his options. He could ask for a temporary relocation to buy time. He could escalate to security. He could insist that verification in the internal system be completed before any passenger was asked to move. He checked the clock above the galley. "We have 5 minutes, he said softly. The words paced, so they did not add panic. "Let's solve this with data." Grace tilted her phone to include the captain's shoulder and the handheld screen without showing any faces. "The captain has asked for internal verification," she narrated in that warm radio cadence that threads a needle between detachment and care. "We will stay live as long as it is helpful. If crew requests privacy for a moment, I will lower the lens and continue audio only. And don't wait." Kylie paused, the way people pause at a gate that might or might not be locked. Then she made her choice. Into the interphone she said, "Requesting security presence at the aircraft door for assistance." Possible temporary removal pending verification. The words were standard. In another context, they could have meant nothing more than an escort for a sick passenger. In this context, they gather a different shape. Imani felt the small shift travel through the cabin like a breeze under a door. She did not change her posture. "Ma'am," she said to Kylie with the same measured courtesy she had offered all along. "I will cooperate with any lawful request. I will remain seated until verification is complete." A mother 2 rows back tightened the strap on her child's harness and looked ahead, eyes clear. The man in the ball cap adjusted his vent and said nothing. Most people, Grace thought, want the same thing at such moments, for the process to prove itself equal to the values it claims. At the forward door, a figure appeared in the jet bridge, broad-shouldered in a dark polo with a badge at the chest. Miguel Torres belonged to the Port Authority police detail that worked the terminals like a tide, constant and necessary. He positioned himself just inside the threshold, with the respectful stillness of someone trained to make presence its own form of de-escalation. He did not touch his radio, he did not rest a hand on the belt. His posture said, "I am here if needed, and also, I am not the first step." Nolan met Miguel's eyes and gave a small nod that acknowledged shared work. "We are verifying the record," he said in a low voice. "We are minutes from door close. We want the data to decide." Miguel nodded once. "Understood, Captain," he said in the same measured tone. "I am here." Kylie approached 2A with a form in her hand that civilians read as authority, but crews recognize as one more piece of paper in the world that runs on them. "Ma'am," she said, not unkindly, "please follow us to the jet bridge for a quick verification outside the cabin." Imani did not raise her voice. "I am willing to cooperate if verification is performed properly," she said. "Please run the internal system first. I will remain seated while you do so." The sentence sat in the air with the weight of sense. It did not challenge anyone's rank. It simply asked the process to hold itself to its own minimum. Grace felt a small relief that the words had been set down clearly, for the record and for the room. She adjusted her phone so the shot remained wide, protecting faces, protecting dignity, protecting the story from the cheap cut. Kylie hesitated. Her training said, keep the cabin moving forward. Her device told her the system would need another cycle. She was not a villain. She was a person in a uniform on a day where many small calculations had pushed her to the edge of a larger one. "Captain," she called. "Without turning it into a performance, we need a decision to keep the schedule." Nolan checked the clock again, and then the cabin. He weighed not only procedures, but what kind of day he wanted to own at the end of the flight. "Run the internal check," he said. "If the system refuses to settle, we will decide with the least harm. Data first." Kylie pressed her lips together in a line that might have been frustration or relief. She stepped to the galley and sent the query again. The device answered with a thinking icon that rotated in place as if time could be coaxed by animation. Grace described it into the phone with neutral words. "A verification request is cycling. The captain has asked for data first." "No." Outside, a baggage cart trundled past with a wobble that made its wheels sing against the pavement. The sound came faint through the fuselage like a small remembered hymn. Imani breathed in and out at an even pace. Her patience was not a performance. It was a boundary. She would not surrender calmly only to have someone mistake the surrender for guilt. A passenger in the row behind Imani leaned into the aisle and then leaned back, the way people do when they want to help but have not yet found the shape of help that will do more good than harm. Another forward cabin attendant hovered near the galley with a look that said, "This is taking too long, and also, let us not make it worse." Grace kept her narration gentle, the language designed to be read aloud by any voice software without stumbling. "We remain at the gate. The forward cabin is quiet. A verification is underway in the internal system. No one is being touched. The passenger at 2A has stated that she will cooperate once verification is complete. The captain has asked for data first. The presence at the door is Port Authority security. He is standing by." The device chimed. Kylie glanced down, then up. Something in the data had shifted but not resolved. She looked toward the captain. He looked at his watch with the reflex of a man who has measured an entire career in segments of 5 minutes, and in the responsibility those segments demand. Nolan held his pen over the removal form. Grace tightened the frame. The viewer count climbed. The unresolved request to verify in the internal system still hung over the forward cabin like a thin veil, almost invisible, and yet felt by anyone who knew the weight of waiting. The aircraft remained tethered to the gate. Door opened to the jet bridge where warm air pooled, and a trace of the terminal's coffee and cleaner drifted in with each quiet footstep beyond the threshold. The light through the windows had changed to the kind of late afternoon gold that flattens shadows and softens edges. A recorded announcement reminded everyone to keep bags under seats and aisles clear, and then the speaker clicked into a hush that made ordinary sounds. The slide of a seatbelt tongue, the soft thud of a bin closing seemed louder than they were. People spoke in low tones as if the room itself had asked them to be careful with their words. Imani Rose sat at 2A with the patience of someone who had decided not to let a moment push her anywhere she did not choose to go. She adjusted a fold at her cuff, then let her hands rest. The calm she wore was not for show. It was the kind that can only be built by years of directing storms into smaller weather. The window beside her framed the wingtip and a sliver of twilight beyond the terminal buildings. Her breath matched the cabin's steady airflow. She did not look toward the galley every few seconds, as a person might when hoping for a verdict. She looked out, then forward, then settled again, as if to tell the room what a center looks like. Kylie Hart stood with her handheld device angled against the reflection of the overhead light, looking for a confirmation that refused to resolve. She had chosen the word thorough all day, a word that normally served her well. Thorough meant safe, meant on time, meant no surprises in a system that punished surprises with delay and complaint. But thorough can hide another word if one is not careful. And every second that passed made the other word which she would not name feel more present. She glanced down the aisle, eyes landing on the face of the captain, then on the door where security had taken up a patient position. She pressed her lips together and made herself breathe like a professional. Captain Nolan Avery stepped forward from the flight deck with the practiced composure of a man who had moved through thousands of departures. He carried a form and a pen, that long, thin instrument of responsibility that can change a person's day with a single stroke. He had paused at the threshold and registered the posture of the cabin, the lead attendant holding a device that refused to agree with itself, a seated passenger whose dignity had the gravity of a calm sea, a security officer who was present the way a lighthouse is present visible, steady, not meant to be the story unless the night demanded it. Nolan stopped at the galley, scanned the handheld display, then looked at Kylie, not with blame but with a question. What exactly do you need me to decide? We are minutes from door close, Nolan said, his voice pitched for the small circle of people who needed to hear. What does the internal system say? It is still cycling, Kylie answered, and that was the honest truth. It could be a mismatch. It could be nothing. Nolan nodded once, then turned to the passenger at 2A. Ma'am, he said, a word that held respect without distance. Thank you for your patience. Imani met his eyes. Captain, she said with the ease of a person who can be firm without raising volume, please verify through the internal system. I will cooperate with any proper request. From a couple of rows back, Grace Liu adjusted the angle of her phone. She had informed the cabin that she was recording and that she would avoid faces. She had offered to lower the lens if anyone objected. No one had objected. The live stream's numbers ticked upward at a steady climb, comments sliding by in clean lines of text, reminders to be respectful, notes from people who had been in similar moments, messages of calm solidarity. Grace kept her voice low and gentle, a warm narration that named facts without heat. She explained that they were at John F. Kennedy, Terminal 5, that the verification pertained to a seat in the forward cabin, that security was present but not intervening. She described posture instead of faces, process instead of rumor. She spoke in sentences that would be easy for any voice software to read without stumbling. At the doorway, Miguel Torres kept his stance open and neutral, the kind of body language that can cancel a room's impulse to escalate by its mere example. He had attended briefings where words like proportional and necessary are given weight, and he practiced them as quietly as possible. He watched the captain, measured the tone, and took an internal step back so that his uniform would not dominate the picture any more than it had to. People saw what they looked for when the badge was in frame. He preferred to be a ballast, not a sail. The overhead chimes sounded again. a soft cue from the system that the pre-close checklist was approaching. The cabin air felt charged, but only slightly, like a radio dial not quite tuned. Nolan checked the form in his hand and weighed the cost of each path. Asked the passenger to step onto the jet bridge and verify there, call the gate, and reset the departure sequence, or hold where they were and insist that the internal system complete its check before any human was asked to move. He had been trained to prefer data to hunches, and he had lived long enough to know that some hunches paraded as data when they were nothing more than the friction of habit. "Let us verify through operations," he said, and the choice in his voice was a line drawn in chalk. Firm, correct, erasable, only by better facts. Kylie lifted the interphone and tapped a sequence that reached beyond the local reservation screen into the network that sat behind it. She waited. The line clicked alive with the faint sound of a room somewhere else, papers moving, a keyboard, a human breath against a headset microphone. The small text on the device flashed a notification banner. Ops. Cassidy Monroe. The name anchored the moment. Cassidy was not a stranger to her. Cassidy had the kind of reputation that made crew conversations an octave calmer just by being mentioned. Nolan set the form down on the galley counter, the pen lying across it like a pause mark in a sentence that had not yet decided how it would end. He took the handset from Kylie and said his call sign, then stated the issue in clean, neutral phrases. The way one speaks when one wants the record to be a record and not a performance. He added, carefully, that security was present, but no action had been taken. He listened, then nodded. "Yes," he said. "We are at the gate. We have a request to verify a forward cabin seat." Imani watched without leaning into the moment. She had asked, repeatedly and politely, for exactly this path. She had decided not to fill the space with extra words that the room might mishear. She let the aircraft's gentle ventilation play along the small hairs near her temple and thought of nothing in particular, which is another way of saying she made a space inside herself that no one else in this room could occupy without her permission. That, too, was a kind of authority. Grace narrated softly, "A call to operations has been connected. The captain is speaking with the supervisor. The room is quiet." The live comments responded with careful gratitude. Someone wrote that they were at home with their elderly mother, who had experienced a similar humiliation once, and they were watching this together, hoping for a better ending. Someone else said that they worked in aviation and that these issues were fixable if people insisted on process instead of assumption. Grace did not read every comment aloud. She kept the pacing humane. The speaker near the galley clicked, and Cassidy's voice came through, steady and unhurried. "Captain, hold position at the gate," she said. "No action at this time beyond verification. Please confirm the passenger remains seated. No removal in progress." "Confirmed," Nolan replied. "Passenger remains seated. No removal. We are minutes from pushback." "Good," Cassidy said. "Stand by." "Oh, now." Kylie pressed the key, and the small screen on the interphone switched to a video window, the kind used rarely and only when tone and face would help a room that needed calming. The screen's glow laid a rectangle of light across the metal coffee pot, as if to bless the ordinary with attention. The sound in the cabin changes, not louder, not quieter, simply more focused, as if everyone had turned a single internal dial toward the same frequency. Miguel shifted his weight a fraction closer to the door, and then stilled again, a decision made and unmade in the same breath. He was not here to add gravity to a moment that already had plenty. He was here to ensure that gravity did not collapse. Kylie glanced from the device to Imani and found herself, unexpectedly, lowering her shoulders by half an inch. She had not thought of herself as a person who needed permission to exhale, and yet here was permission from a voice that expected good work done properly and offered its own calm as a model. She felt, all at once, the undignified itch of wanting to be right give way to the more dignified relief of wanting to do right. It was a shift so small it would not show on camera, and so large it might rewire a day. Nolan leaned toward the handset again. "Operations," he said, his eyes on the time display above the galley. "We are approaching the final minutes before pushback." "Understood," Cassidy answered, and the word held enough care to carry a room across a thin bridge. The cabin air seemed to weigh with them. A child in the front row seat tapped the window shade with 2 fingers and then stopped, as if picking up the adult's cue. Across the aisle, a woman closed her eyes and folded her hands as if in a silent practice of patience. The man in the ball cap adjusted his vent and let out a breath that matched the cabin's flow. Grace lowered the lens a degree so that the faces even in profile became simply gestures and posture, and her voice became a thread stitching the room together. Operations is on the line. A hold at the gate is in effect. Verification will continue. No movement of any passenger has been ordered. Kylie looked down at the handheld screen again. The little icon paused, then spun, then paused once more. She had never hated an animated wheel before today. She could feel the seconds slipping like coins into a slot machine she had not asked to play. She touched the edge of the device with the tip of her finger and then removed her hand. A tiny act of discipline in a world where touching things often stands in for control. Nolan placed one hand on the galley counter, grounding himself against the cool metal. He knew the feeling of being on the edge of a call that could tip either way. He had made such calls at altitude in weather, at night over dark stretches of land, and he had made them on bright afternoons with a clear field ahead. What made them hard was never the form. It was always the human variable in the equation. Today, the human variable was dignity, and his better self recognized it as the non-negotiable term. The interphone chimed with a particular tone that signaled a video connection. Kylie stepped back a half pace so the small camera would capture only Nolan from the side and the empty air above the coffee pot. The image stabilized. The sound softened to a kind of professional quiet that everyone in a uniform learns to recognize. The door to the jet bridge stayed open. The world outside went on being the world cars moving, vest bright, a pink stripe of sky lifting along the horizon, and the world inside gathered itself for a sentence that would matter. No one in the cabin needed to be told that a turning point had arrived. Even people who did not know the language of aviation knew the language of rooms. The hum of the air vents and the almost inaudible creak of plastic against fabric and the weight of a dozen breaths settling into the same rhythm created a hush that was not fear but attention. The child who had tapped the shade kept still, eyes round, learning something that would not have a name until later. Nolan lifted the handset as the image sharpened. The little screen threw a cool light onto the steel. A thin reflection traced along the spout of the pot, a small accidental flourish. He cleared his throat, not because he needed to, but because bodies sometimes mark moments in simple ways. Grace steadied her grip on the phone and framed the shot just wide enough to show action without identity. Miguel shifted his stance no more than shoe length, then settled again. Kylie's fingers opened and closed once, then rested at her sides. Imani did not move. Cassidy's face filled the small frame, composed and clear, the background a blur of office light. She did not speak quickly. She did not perform authority. She used it like a tool handed to her for a purpose. Cassidy's face appears on the small screen. She speaks slowly and clearly. First, confirm the identity of the passenger in 2A. The entire cabin holds its breath. The call from operations stayed open. A thin line of sound and intention stretching from the small screen in the forward galley to a quiet office somewhere behind the airport's glass and concrete. The cabin held its collective breath without theatrics. Only the humane, quiet people save for rooms where dignity is at stake. Late afternoon light had turned the aluminum a soft gold. The jet bridge door remained open, and with each small step beyond the threshold, a breath of warm terminal air carried a trace of coffee and cleaner into the cool of the aircraft. The gate number lived on the monitors like a steady fact. Gate 25, Terminal 5, John F. Kennedy. The seat lived as a fact as well. 2A in the forward cabin. In the space between those facts stood a woman who had asked, simply and repeatedly, for the system designed to carry facts to do its job. The small video window brightened. A clear face came into view. Cassidy Monroe did not rush. She spoke in a tone chosen for rooms that need a leader to lower the temperature while raising the standard. She asked for a fresh scan of the boarding pass and the identification through the internal channel and nodded for Kylie to begin. Kylie steadied the handheld device, angled it to cut down on glare, and sent the scan. The device chimed once, then again. The animated wheel made a small, maddening circle, and then the screen shifted to a new page. Lines of text resolved as if a fog had lifted. Imani's name appeared first, full and direct, as names should appear. Beneath it, the line that would change the weight of the room. Imani Rhodes, Executive Chair, Skyline Aviation Services, Strategic Partner at John F. Kennedy. The words did not sound like a trumpet. They sounded like a level finally resting on truth. Cassidy did not perform surprise or triumph. She used her authority as it was meant to be used. From this point forward, she said, her voice filling the forward galley and carrying softly to the seats beyond. Every action will be based on data, not on assumptions. The passenger in 2A is verified. She remains seated. Captain Nolan Avery stood a fraction taller, not from pride but from alignment. He had asked for data, and data had answered. He met Imani's eyes and found there the calm of a person relieved not by status, but by the return of sense. Kylie, holding the scanner, felt her shoulders settle, as if a weight she had been pretending not to feel had been set down for her. She had wanted to be thorough. Thoroughness had walked her to the edge of something else. Now a line had been drawn. Grace Liu kept the live stream steady and her narration warm, a thread through the moment rather than a knot. Verification complete, she said, for the viewers who had held their patience with the room. Operations has confirmed the passenger in seat 2A. The instruction is to act on data, not on assumptions. She reminded the audience that faces would remain protected and voices softened if requested. Comments arrived in streams of appreciation, a quiet public promising to be better witnesses. Cassidy continued in that unhurried cadence that allows a room to move with a decision rather than feel crushed by it. Hold pushback, she said. File an incident report at the gate. Do not pursue any coercive measures with the passenger in seat. 2A. I expect a short briefing on what led to this delay and what will prevent a repeat. We will review procedures with the crews on this route. For now, keep the plane at the gate until the paperwork is started, then prepare for departure. Oh, Namagan, Miguel Torres, steady in his place by the door, let his hands relax from a practiced readiness. He had come as a precaution and would leave as a witness to a process corrected in real time. He made a small note for the report he will file later. No removal, no raised voices, verification by operations, directives followed, dignity intact. The inside of his job, on better days, looked exactly like this. Kylie spoke into the interphone to relay the whole to the gate agent. Her voice carried neither defiance nor defeat. It carried the plain decency of a person doing the next right thing. Operations have ordered a hold, she said. We will file the incident report here. No further action with the passenger in 2A. She turned back to Imani with a professionalism in her posture that had more room for humility than before. Ma'am, she said, thank you for your patience. Imani nodded once. She had asked for the system to see her as it would see anyone else, no more and no less. She had not asked for a public display. She had not asked to be the lesson of the day. Yet, if a lesson was to be offered, a steady witness is better than an angry one. Accuracy matters, she said. Voice even, the words chosen as much for the room as for the record. Thank you for verifying. Nolan picked up the form and wrote with clear strokes, each letter a small promise to the future that this would be remembered as more than a glitch. He checked the time in words on the wall clock out of long habit, and then addressed the cabin in that radio warm cadence that gets a room from tension to order without bruising the moment. Ladies and gentlemen, he said, we're holding at the gate for a few minutes to complete paperwork with operations. We appreciate your patience and your kindness to one another. We will depart shortly after the hold is lifted. The forward cabin exhaled as a single body. A woman across the aisle closed her eyes and opened them with gratitude that felt like a small prayer. The man in the ball cap tipped the brim with a shy half-smile. Grace's viewers sent messages that sounded like distant neighbors leaning over fences to say they were glad things had worked as they should. She added one more line to her narration. Careful with each syllable for the sake of the software that would read it later. The instruction to base actions on data, not assumptions, has been spoken aloud by operations. That sentence deserves to be heard in more rooms. Kylie signaled the gate agent. The printer near the podium chattered out the first pages of the incident report, ordinary paper suddenly heavy with meaning. She signed where she was meant to sign and left space where others would add their names. The words on the form were familiar. Description of events, actions taken, corrective steps. For once, The space for corrective steps would not be a vague promise, but a list that could be taught and tested. She felt a quiet resolve take the place of the defensive hum she had been carrying since the gate. Resolve life longer. Cassidy remained on the line long enough to ensure that the hold had been registered and the report started. She did not need to remind the captain that leadership is also a tone set in small rooms. She did not need to remind the crew that the phrase based on data, not assumptions, would be repeated in training and measured in practice. She only needed to say, "Thank you, Captain. Thank you, crew." And then, "We will follow up after you depart." The screen dimmed the shade but stayed connected. A presence rather than a pressure. Imani let the cool air from the vent brush her cheek and considered how many times a life collects moments like this and keeps moving. Dignity is not a spectacle. It is a practice. She thought of the many crews who get it right every day without fanfare. She thought of the people who have less room to insist and the need to widen that room. She thought of the work ahead that she was in the position to make real. None of this needed to be said aloud here. The right people had heard what mattered. Miguel eased a small step backwards so the doorway was completely clear, a gesture as symbolic as it was practical. He checked in with the captain in a low voice and received a nod that said, "We are good." He stayed for the paperwork, present but no longer necessary as a possibility in anyone's mind. The badge on his chest reflected a sliver of the cabin's light and then went still. Grace ended the live stream with a closing sentence chosen to leave viewers calm rather than adrenalized. She promised a brief summary afterward and thanked the crew and the passengers for the measured way they had held the room. She saved the video, set the phone to standby, and sat with the relief that comes when a story bends toward the principle you wanted it to serve. She looked toward Imani without intruding and gave the smallest nod, a private thank you offer from one stranger to another. In the galley, Nolan signed the section that belonged to the captain and then returned the pen to its clip. He looked down the row of forward seats, not with inspection, but with a simple check. Was the room back in one piece? Were people breathing easier? Had the tone been repaired? He met Kylie's eyes for a beat longer than usual. And in that beat, a lesson traveled without either of them having to write it down. Thoroughness is a virtue when it protects people, not when it presses them. The printer produced the last page. The gate agent tucked the paperwork into a clear sleeve. Kylie filed the copy meant for the crew binder. The announcement chime sounded again, and the light above the forward door shifted softly in preparation for what would come next when the hold lifted. Somewhere in the terminal, a new flight began to board, its own small drama of logistics and feeling already in motion. Here, the cast was the same, but the script had changed. Kylie stood very still, the scanner still in her hand. Nolan looked straight ahead. "We will do this right from now." A few scattered claps rose from the back. The forward cabin steadied itself in the hush that follows a decision made in the open. Paperwork arrived from the gate with the quiet clatter of a small printer. The sheets carried by a ground agent whose steps were brisk and respectful. The hold remained in place. The jet bridge door stayed open. The breath of the terminal drifted in and mixed with the cool, conditioned air of the aircraft. Passengers settled as if they understood that a pause well used can save an hour of regret. The late light thinned toward evening, gilding the metal edge of the galley counter and softening the reflection in the coffee pot. A routine chime sounded and then fell silent, a metronome for patience. Out of the cockpit, Captain Nolan Avery returned to the forward galley and met the eyes that mattered in that small circle. Kylie Hart, with the handheld device lowered to a neutral angle, Imani Rose in 2A, steady as a shoreline, Miguel Torres by the door, presence without pressure, the gate agent with a clear sleeve of forms, Grace Liu just behind, camera at her chest. Narration paused out of respect while people found their footing again. Nolan breathed in, then spoke in the tone he reserved for setting rooms back in order. He thanked the cabin for waiting, and he thanked them for their kindness to one another while the crew completed a verification. His voice did not dramatize. It guided. He turned to Imani first, the way a person turns to the center of a compass. "Ma'am," he said, "on behalf of the flight deck and this crew, I apologize for the delay and for the lack of respect you experienced. We should have relied on our internal verification sooner." The words did not make a flourish. They made a repair. Imani inclined her head, acceptance without triumph. "Thank you, Captain," she said, her voice even. "Accuracy matters. So does dignity." I appreciate that you chose to verify through the internal system. The sentence landed in the cabin with the calm weight of common sense. It was not a performance. It was the setting of a standard. Kylie stepped forward, hands open at her sides, professional posture softened by plain humanity. The right words came slowly, as they do when sincerity outruns rehearsal. "Ma'am," she said to Imani. And then she widened the address just enough for the nearby rows to hear. "I'm sorry for my part in extending this. I held on to the wrong question too long. We will follow the process correctly." She did not excuse herself. She did not fill the space with the word thorough. She let the apology stand the way a person stands when no other stance is honest. The gate agent placed the incident forms on the counter. Miguel gave a nod that signaled he would witness as needed. Nolan uncapped the pen and began the captain's report. The letters tight and clear. He wrote the facts in words, not in haste. Verification requested. Operations confirmed. Passenger remained seated. No coercive measures taken. Hold ordered. Apology issued. He left space for corrective steps, knowing the line would not be another vague promise. He intended to write what Cassidy Monroe had already declared. Actions will be based on data, not assumptions. Cassidy's voice returned over the interphone, the call still alive like a quiet wire threaded through the room. She kept it simple, because simple carries far. "Captain," she said, "thank you. Please announce the new standard so the cabin understands what is changing today. Effective immediately on this route, crews will follow a two-step verification standard before asking any passenger to change seats or leave a seat. Step 1. Verify eligibility through the internal system. Step 2. Consult operations if the screen does not resolve. Only after both steps may any further action be considered. Record the policy in the report. We will schedule training as soon as possible." Always, Nolan repeated the standard aloud to the cabin in that measured cadence that turns policy into speech people can carry with them. He used full words instead of shorthand, each syllable a small assurance to every listener that the lesson would not be lost. Passengers nodded. The man in the ball cap tipped his brim again, a gesture of approval that felt like a neighbor's thumbs up. A woman across the aisle whispered thank you to no one in particular and to the room in general. Grace resumed her narration for the stream and for the record, her tone a warm line that did not fray. A two-step verification standard is now in place. Step 1 is to verify eligibility in the internal system. Step 2 is to consult operations. If the screen does not resolve, only then may further action be considered. Dignity remains intact. Kylie accepted the handheld tablet from her colleague and keyed in the note that the standard had been read to the cabin. She filed a crew copy of the report in a binder, the plastic rings clicking shut with the satisfaction of small order restored. She looked to Imani again and, without asking for absolution, offered service. "May I bring you some water while we finish the paperwork?" The question was ordinary, which is what made it welcome. "Water would be nice," Imani said, the syllable soft. In the pause that followed, she added what only a person intent on building rather than scoring would add. "If your training team wants a guest voice for the next session on unconscious bias, I will make time at John F. Kennedy before the end of the month. I prefer repairs to rematches." Kylie blinked once, surprised by Grace and steadied by it. "Thank you," she said, simple as that, and stepped to the galley to pour a cup, leaving the label outward and the top clear for a stir stick. She carried it back in a way that felt almost ceremonial, not because it was water, but because service done rightly is always a ceremony, however small. Miguel dictated his note to his own system in a low voice. Consonants neat, vowels steady. No removal. Passenger remained seated. Verification completed by operations. Crew announced policy. Environment calm. He liked how the words lined up. He liked leaving a gate having been useful in the quiet way, the way where nobody got hurt and everyone got better. The printer hummed one last time and fell still. The gate agent slid the final page into the sleeve and positioned the signature tab where the captain's hand would find it without searching. Nolan signed, then handed the pen to Kylie, who added her name with care. He picked up the handset and spoke a brief message to operations, confirming that the announcement had been made and the report completed. Cassidy thanked the crew once more and promised follow-up by the end of the week. The small screen dimmed to a standby glow and then went dark, not a withdrawal but the polite end of a well-timed visit. Nolan returned to the cabin address to close the loop for every listener. including those who had not caught the first announcement. He kept the language human. He said that the hold would lift once the gate agent cleared the paperwork, that they would push from the gate and fly the published route, that they would do so with a renewed standard designed to keep people's rights in front of routine rush. He thanked them again for their kindness to one another. He meant it. Grace saved the stream and recorded a short recap for people who watched later with a cup of tea at a kitchen table, or with a daughter on a couch, or with a friend who needed to hear that a better ending is possible. She avoided names, she protected faces, she kept her voice low and warm. She chose a closing line that honored the calm respect is a standard, not a perk. She set the phone to standby and let the device rest against her palm, present without intruding. Kylie, water delivered, stew with the other forward attendant, and review the checklist aloud, a familiar litany that washed the room with competence. Bells checked, bins lashed, galley secured, forms filed, interphone clear. She felt the difference inside each word. She felt how a list can carry meaning when the choices behind it are clean. She knew that the day would stay with her, not as a bruise, but as a marker. Next time her mind reached for the old word thoroughly, it would come back with a companion. Fair. Imani lifted the cup and took a measured sip. Cool water, cool air, a cool room after a warm corridor. She did not rehearse what she might say to a reporter or a boardroom or a committee. She let the moment be small again, because small is where life happens most of the time. She looked out at the wing and the evening beyond and thought of a late dinner near the airport on the other coast, a diner with a neon sign like a soft whistle and coffee poured before she asked. The gate agent gave a thumbs up to the galley, and the gesture moved like a ripple down the row of crew. Nolan acknowledged with a nod and a brief smile, then passed the signal to the ramp team outside. The hold was almost done. The cabin seemed to sense it, the way rooms sense when a meeting is winding toward a good end. A child in the first rows asked in a whisper if the plane would fly soon. and a parent answered with a murmur that sounded like a promise and like gratitude at the same time. One last glance passed between the people at the center of the afternoon: captain, lead attendant, passenger, witness, officer. None of them needed to speak. The choices had already been spoken, and the record had already been made. The speaker chimed, "Prepare to close the door." Imani gave a slight nod. Grace lowered her camera and said softly, "This story is not over yet." The aircraft eased back from the gate with a gentle shudder, the tug pulling it into the slow choreography of the ramp. The last sunlight folded across the tarmac, a band of copper sliding into blue. Passengers felt the shift as a promise. The long pause at the gate had passed. The flight was moving forward again. Overhead bins stayed locked, belts snug across laps, and voices lowered as if everyone agreed to let the moment breathe. The safety demonstration ran with its familiar rhythm, words recited 1,000 times but heard now with a different texture, like a prayer said after a scare. The forward attendants made their gestures with steady hands, pointing, sweeping, showing, not just to fulfill procedure, but to remind the cabin that order could be kind. Imani Rose rested her head lightly against the seat back, her body angled toward the window where the wing stretched into fading light. The water cup rested on her tray table, a simple emblem of calm restored. She carried herself not as someone vindicated, but as someone resolved. She had offered training help because she wanted repairs, not rematches. Now, in the quiet before takeoff, she thought of that promise, of how many hands it would take to turn a phrase like data first into a real habit. Nolan Avery, in the cockpit, moved through the checklist with his co-pilot, voice steady, every response an affirmation. He had chosen principle over schedule, and now he was flying both. Kylie Hart worked the aisle softly, offering small comforts water, a blanketer movement more deliberate than earlier. Her words shorter but truer. She carried the apology like a pebble in her pocket, a reminder she could touch without anyone seeing. Grace Liu held her phone. The stream ended, but she typed a summary with careful fingers. Respect is the standard, not a privilege. She planned to post it later when the cabin slept, a way to remind people without stirring noise. Around them, passengers settled into magazines, tablets, quiet conversation, the relief of a flight becoming a flight again. The climb lifted the cabin into a soft dusk sky. New York City lights flared below like constellations drawn in straight lines, bridges glowing across the dark water. The ascent smoothed, The seatbelt light clicked off, and a collective sigh moved down the aisle. Kylie stopped at 2A with a pitcher of water, her eyes steady this time. "May I refill your cup?" she asked. Imani nodded, gratitude without flourish. A few rows back, a woman leaned across to her seatmate and whispered, "It should always be this way, simple and respectful." Grace finished her post-draft and saved it. A passenger asked for fairness. The crew confirmed it. The system learned. Respect is not extra. Respect is required. She added no names. She knew the value of restraint. Nolan checked the altitude and then stepped into the cabin for a moment, a courtesy walk. He paused by Imani's seat. "We will take this forward," he said. She replied, "Make it real, not rare." The words were plain, but plain words carry best. In the back, a child asked when cookies would come. The mother promised soon. The plane leveled, steady on its path west. There was no burst of applause, no sudden drama. The cabin's climax had already passed at the gate. Now the reward was ordinary. Air smoothed out, trays unlocked, books opened. Yet, in that ordinariness lived the true climax, the recognition that dignity had been preserved, that rules could be written in real time, and that the smallest words spoken at the right pitch could redirect the course of a flight and maybe a company. The moment of high emotion was not loud, but lasting. A quiet decision echoing in each small act of civility. The flight attendants rolled out the service cart. The clink of ice against plastic cups marked a return to ritual. A man in the row behind Grace lifted his glass in a small toast to no one in particular. "To fairness," he whispered, not caring who heard. Grace smiled, typed it into her notes, and thought it might be the line to end her post. Nolan returned to the cockpit, reviewed fuel and weather, and thought of his children. He hoped they would board planes one day where dignity was automatic, not something earned by insistence. Kylie noted her own relief at being corrected. It meant she could correct herself the next time before needing help. The monitor at each seat flashed the message from the airline. A new two-step verification standard is in effect for all routes from John F. Kennedy. Thank you for your patience and understanding. Imani glanced at it, then out the window. The two images layered in her reflection. The sky stretched wide, carrying them westward. She thought of training sessions ahead, of how reforms begin as memos but must become instincts. She thought of the long work waiting, but tonight she let herself rest. The voice of the captain came through again, calm and certain. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are at cruising altitude. Service will continue shortly. Thank you for your patience today, and thank you for your kindness to one another." That kindness is what makes a flight a community. The words landed gently, carried on the quiet hum of engines. Passengers leaned back, closed their eyes, opened books, or simply stared into the dark outside. The cabin lights dimmed to evening mode, soft glows underfoot, reading lamps above. The world beyond the window was a quilt of stars and the faint glow of cities sliding beneath. Kylie approached Imani once more, holding a pad and pen. "If you are serious about helping with training," she said softly, "I would like to pass your contact to our manager. Would that be all right?" Imani rolled her number with calm strokes. "Yes," she said. "Make it count." Grace, watching from behind, thought of how moments like this are seeds planted in small rooms, growing in larger ones. The monitors flickered again, this time with a scheduled airline announcement. A formal statement will be released within 24 hours. Passengers nodded. Some murmured approval. A child tapped his window and whispered, "Look, we're flying." And his parent answered with a smile. The plane pressed on into the night, carrying not only bodies but choices. The notification glowed across every screen. Official statement forthcoming. Imani looked out the window, city lights slipping into darkness, and said nothing. Baggage claim at San Francisco was bright and brisk, the bells humming like patient rivers while people clustered in small islands of relief. The aircraft had rolled to a stop without fuss. The door had opened to cool air and a hint of sea salt, and the cabin had emptied with the quiet efficiency of travelers who understood that courtesy still carries far after a long day. The floor near the carousels shone in rectangles of light. A nearby sign announced ground transportation options, in a voice that sounded almost like a neighbor leaning over a fence. Imani waited with a carry-on at her side, calm restored and kept. Around her, families gathered strollers. An older couple compared luggage tags. and a service dog blinked, a slow, satisfied blink. She checked her phone only once to confirm what she already felt. The day's hardest work was behind them. Grace stood a short distance away, her phone in one hand and a paper bag in the other, letting the last part of the day settle into a shape she could describe without making it louder than it had been. She drafted a short post in simple sentences for people who would listen later, with a cup of tea, or with a friend who needed to hear that procedure can be better than assumption. Respect is a standard, not a privilege, she wrote, then saved it for later. A monitor near the carousel flickered to an airline message that scrolled in steady lines. An official statement would be released within 24 hours, and a new two-step verification standard would be applied across departures from John F. Kennedy. People did not cheer, they did not need to. A few nodded. Someone said quietly, "Good," and let it be enough. Captain Nolan crossed the hall with a small roller bag and a thoughtful look. He had filed his portion of the report and now kept to a pace that did not announce him. He stopped near Imani and offered a brief greeting, the kind that keeps propriety intact while acknowledging the shared ground of a hard afternoon. "We will carry this forward," he said in a tone that made carrying sound like a duty and not a slogan. Imani replied, "Make it real, not rare." He heard it as the instruction he would repeat in rooms that decide how days like this end. Kylie appeared a moment later, uniform jacket over her arm, eyes clear. The apology from the gate had not worn off. It had settled in. "Thank you for your patience," she said. And the sentence carried more weight, now that the room was ordinary again. "If our manager reaches out about training, I will make sure your voice is heard." Imani nodded. "Let it be useful." They parted with those small acknowledgments that matter more than anyone admits. The carousel delivered Imani's bag with a soft bump. She lifted it easily, adjusted the handle, and stepped into the cool night through the sliding doors where the taxi lane breathed in waves of headlight. The air tasted like eucalyptus and ocean. A diner sat 2 blocks from the airport road, its neon sign a steady halo over chrome trim. Inside, the bell over the door chimed a cheerful note. A waitress in a navy apron said, "Evening, hun," and steered Imani to a booth with a clear view of the counter and the door. The coffee arrived before she asked, poured with the practiced way of a hand that had learned 1,000 mornings and more than a few late nights. Refills were assumed. The pie case glowed softly. In the corner, a couple shared fries and a story about a visit with grandkid. The television over the register ran a muted local news loop, captions promising a press conference in the morning. Imani ordered something simple, a bowl of chili, a slice of pie, and the comfort of a place where kindness was ordinary. She tipped in the way she was raised to tip a quiet 20% as a baseline for work done well in the late hours. The server called her dear without a blink. The word landed like the small kindness it was. Imani watched the room with the traveler's grateful attention. A wheelchair user at the counter swapping jokes with the cook, a student in a hoodie scribbling notes on paper while a milkshake swayed slowly on the laminate, a driver in a reflective vest nodding to himself as if practicing a song. Nothing in the scene was new. That was the point. A day that had strained at the edges began to knit itself back together with pie and coffee and clean light. The airline statement posted while she finished the chili. The push alert lit her phone with a simple header and a quiet tone. She read it in full, each sentence measured, no fanfare. It named the policy clearly, pledged training, described the two-step verification standard in words anyone could understand, and thanked passengers for patience and for kindness shown to one another. It did not name her. It did not need to. The point was not a person. The point was a pattern being rewritten. She thought of crews on other routes, other terminals, other rooms where the wrong question sometimes shows up. She thought of how reforms begin on paper and then must be rehearsed until they become muscle memory. Across town, Grace took a seat by the hotel window and posted her summary with the care she had promised. She kept faces out, kept names out, kept the tone low and warm. She added one line from the gate because it deserved a second life in a calmer hour. Actions will be based on data, not assumptions. Comments came from teachers, from retired ticket agents, from people who had been told to move along in rooms that did not see them clearly. Grace replied to only a few and then let the rest talk to one another. A better room teaches itself. Nolan sat alone in the crew lounge for 5 minutes before the shuttle. completing one last note to operations in a tone that sounded like a man putting his name where it matters. We chose verification over removal, he wrote. We chose clarity over speed. We will brief the route. He tucked the pen away and looked toward a vending machine where a bag of peanuts hung at an angle as if thinking about falling. He smiled at the ordinary thought that a machine might need a nudge, then left it alone. Not everything needs help to end well. Kylie called her mother from the curb and described the day in spare words, careful not to make herself the center. Her mother listened and said, "Do the next right thing." Kylie promised she would and then found the rideshare driver who held up a placard with her name. She slid into the back seat and watched the terminal lights move in neat lines. The engine purred, the night opened. At the diner, the server returned with a fresh coffee without asking. Imani thanked her and asked for the bill. "No rush," the server said, and meant it. Imani signed, left a tip, and slid from the booth with a small smile for the kindness of strangers. She took a last look at the pie case, the bell over the door, the counter where the cook flipped the patty with a kind of quiet pride, and tasted the relief of an evening restored to scale. The formal statement had been made, the policy had a name, the room had learned a better way to hold itself. That was the climax of the last chapter. Not noise, but commitment, written where it counts and spoken where it can be heard by people who will carry it. Outside, the air was cool, the sky a dark silk pricked by runway lights and a handful of stars. Traffic hissed along the road like a steady breath. Somewhere overhead, another plane tracked west, a bright dot leaning into the distance. Imani stepped into the night and let the door swing shut behind her. Imani leaves the diner, a cool night breeze. The phone vibrates email, confirming the first training session next week at JFK. The day settles away good evenings do steam rising from a fresh cup, a policy written plainly, and a quiet plane becoming only a plane again. In small rooms and long corridors, strangers choose dignity over hurry, and the noise of suspicion gives way to the low music of ordinary care. The lesson is simple and old. Love makes room. Atonement repairs it, and together we build a kinder home than the one we inherited. Like a porch light left on at dusk, one measured act of fairness can guide weary travelers past the darker turns of a life. If this story brushes against your own memories, perhaps take a moment to notice the quiet gifts nearby, the refill offered, the seat saved, the gentleness that costs almost nothing. And if it warmed you, consider letting that warmth travel on to someone waiting in a long line or a quiet seat, so the light keeps finding its way forward.